Hello, everybody. How are you tonight? I understand that Facebook's been giving some of us a hard time. I'm sorry about that. Hola, Lana. Hola. Hey, Rob. Nice to see you. How are things going? Kay says hi all. Dale says evening, comrades. And Rick says evening, Joe and everyone. No particular order. Shows us he's wearing his sunglasses. Dolores says hi. Kay says hi, Stephanie and Dolores. Bonnie says hi, everyone. Dale says Bonnie, yo. Kay says hi, Bonnie. Susan Eldridge is here. 8 other people have joined, and one of them is Mark Collins. Hi, Mark. Nice to see you. And Stephanie says, hey, my loves. Mark says hello, all. Okay, the topic for tonight is the need for relief and the corruption preventing it from getting to those who need it. So, what we're going to discuss tonight is about the need for relief, and we're also going to discuss just a few things about the very corrupt things that are being done in the name of relief for people who need it. And hi, Mustafa. Hi, Steve Wolfbrand. Nice to see you. Okay, Dolores is getting a watch party started. So, we have an article from The Hill. You know The Hill, or you should know The Hill. The Hill is the sponsor of The Rising Show. And it's also a publication that focuses on what's going on in the Congress. The article is by Sylvan Lane. The headline is 3.2 million more Americans file new jobless claims amid the coronavirus downturn. I think I said yesterday it was likely to be 3 million or something like that, right? So there it is. 3 million more, 3.2 million more were announced just today. Almost 3.2 million Americans, I think the figure was, roughly 3.17 million, filed new applications for unemployment benefits last week. As the U.S. economy continues to atrophy under the stress of the coronavirus pandemic. How high is this going to go, folks? How many more weeks are we going to see 3 million Americans, or close to 3 million Americans, getting kicked out of work? New applications for jobless benefits decreased slightly from last week, falling 677,000 from a revised total of more than 3.8 million applications filed in the week ending April 25th. This, of course, was the week ending when? I guess it was May 3rd or May 2nd. But the new batch of claims brings the total number of new applications for jobless benefits to more than 33 million since mid-March. Now, before mid-March, there were 6 million who are unemployed, nearly 6 million. So we're not looking at 33.2 million who are unemployed now. We're probably looking at 39.2 million at least who are unemployed now. But then there's the matter of the undercount. And the undercount could be as high as 12.2 million, which means we could be as high as 51.4 million people unemployed right now. Might be less than that, but somewhere between 39.2 and 51.4. The insured unemployment rate stands at 15.5% as of April 25th. So it doesn't count the extra 3 million as of March the 2nd or March the 3rd, okay, or whenever the date was for last week. So, also the article says, though some economists estimate the real-time unemployment rate to be above 20%, some economists like myself, okay, I guess I'm not an economist. To be absolutely correct about it, I'm a political economist, a political scientist by degree, who studied an awful lot of economics since 2009, and had a fair amount of economics before that too. But anyway, quote, while initial campaigns for unemployment benefits continue to slowly recede from their peaks, they remain at painfully high levels, wrote Oxford economics economists Nancy Vanden Houten and Gregory Dacko in a Thursday analysis. And the U.S. is believed to have lost more than 20 million jobs over the past 2 months, as businesses were forced to close and lay off workers amid efforts to slow the spread of COVID-19. Now, I don't know how the 20 million jobs squares with the 33 million people who have lost their jobs and who are new applicants for unemployment insurance. It probably has to do with something technical in the reports, but at the end of April 25th, the figure was, I believe, something like 30.2 or something like that. So how that squares with the 20 million jobs, I don't know. The April jobs report, set to be released on Friday, is expected to shatter records for the largest one-month decline in jobs and the highest recorded unemployment rate in U.S. history. So we got to see what that is. Now, the highest right now unemployment rate, or the previously highest unemployment rate, was 24.9%. in the middle of the Depression, okay, in the 1930s. Of course, we measure unemployment a little differently now. Anyway, Vanden Houten projected a loss of 28 million jobs and an unemployment rate of 17%. Surveys for April jobs report are conducted the week of April 12th, so Friday's numbers will not include the full extent of the losses during the month of April. Trump and some of his top advisors have seized on the economic toll of the pandemic to push states to peel back business closures and social distancing restrictions, despite rising COVID-19 cases nationwide. Yes, it's a staggering figure. No question about it. The people of our country are warriors, said Trump on Tuesday during a trip to Arizona. I'm not saying anything is perfect, and yes, will some people be affected? Yes. Will some people be affected badly? Yes. But we have to get our country open, and we have to get it open soon. Why? Why can't we leave it closed and supply all the money that people need to get along, to continue to survive and continue to stay home? Why can't we provide the help that small businesses need to keep people employed? We've done a huge amount to bail out the big businesses. Why haven't we done enough to bail out the small businesses yet? Why haven't we done enough to bail out the states, cities, and counties yet? While more than 30 states have already begun to loosen economically restrictive social distancing rules, economists warn that a solid recovery depends on a drastic increase in testing capacity and an effective treatment or vaccine for COVID-19. We all know by now that this is true. We have to insist that this government provide the wherewithal to people so they can stay home until the antivirals are available, until the antibody drugs are available, until we've bent the curve so we know what's going to happen to them if they go out. And yes, the curve is different in different parts of the country. And yes, different parts of the country would be able to open up before other parts of the country. But it is unlikely that parts of the country that have not experienced the full fury of the full fury of the disease should be allowed to open up anytime soon, because if you open them up, all that's going to happen is that the epidemic will spread to places that have so far avoided it. I should be correct and say the pandemic will. So next, what do we have? We have the needs. More about needs. Direct relief demanded for hard-hit U.S. families as depression-level unemployment tops 33 million. This one's by Julia Conley, staff writer at Common Dreams. And the total jobless claims amid the outbreak, according to this article, are now at an estimated 33.5 million. I'll take that. Which means, if so, then my estimate with the additional 6 million would be at 39.5 million. According to the department, the unemployment rate in the U.S. is now 15.5%, but some economists, including Elise Gould of the Economic Policy Institute, say that 20% of workers may actually be out of a job, with possibly 20% of workers out of a job, but yet to file for unemployment. Is she saying there's another possibly 20% of workers out of a job who still haven't filed for unemployment? Whoa. Not that surprising. If all the workers who filed for unemployment insurance up to and including the reference week, April 12th to 18th in the claims data, were counted in the measured unemployment numbers, the unemployment rate could hit 18% in the latest jobs day release, wrote Gould, the senior economist at EPI. Of course, this fails to count the workers who were unable to file or lost their jobs and were not eligible for unemployment insurance. The CARES Act that greatly expanded eligibility for unemployment insurance were only operational in most states in the last couple of weeks. Taken together, this could suggest an unemployment rate in excess of 20%, levels last seen in the Great Depression. Yes, I think that's accurate. And many workers who stop working as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic may never be counted as unemployed, wrote Gould's colleague, EPI Policy Director Heidi Shearholtz. These workers will be counted as dropping out of the labor force instead of as unemployed because they're unable to search for work due to the lockdown, or because they're not available to work as they are, for example, caring for children whose school has closed. Additionally, noted journalist Lance Lambert at Fortune on Thursday, the explosion in unemployment claims since mid-March, when businesses across the country were forced to shut down to help stop the spread of COVID-19, more than 7 million Americans were already unemployed at that time. So there it is, another 7 million. I estimated it at 6 million. However, Lambert at Fortune is estimating it at 7 million. So 7 million plus the 33.5 million, that equals not 39.5 million, but 40.5 million unemployed, or a real unemployment rate of 24.9%, wrote Lambert. Oh, I was evidently mistaken, according to Lambert, because he said that during the Great Depression, the highest unemployment rate recorded was not 24.9%, which I thought it was, but he said was 25.6% in May 1933. And his reference for that is the Federal Reserve, the St. Louis Fed, and the series they published. So that's probably accurate. Probably more accurate than my memory. So there it is. We're at 24.9%. And we're there now, okay, according to Lambert. Okay, and during the Depression, the highest unemployment rate was at 25.6% in May 1933. So guess what? We're now over that number because we've been losing more jobs since the new week started. And we're getting near to the end of the week. So by the time we reach next Thursday and we get the new report, we will know that we have hit the highest rate of unemployment in recorded history, because we're surely going to go over the 25.6% if we're already at 24.9%. In light of the new numbers, Jayapal of Washington and Bernie Sanders highlighted legislation they've put forward in recent weeks to make sure Americans continue receiving their paychecks for the duration of the crisis. We've been hearing this from families across Washington. American businesses cut 20 million jobs in April alone. This was tweeted by Jayapal. And more than half came from smaller companies. We need a Paycheck Guarantee Act to immediately get relief to these workers and employers. And that was a quote, or there's a reference there to the Seattle Times. I had an article in the Seattle Times. Bernie Sanders tweeted, Another 3.2 million people filed for unemployment last week, bringing the total since mid-March to over 33 million. Washington must not abandon working people as COVID-19 cases outside of New York keep on rising. We must pass the Paycheck Security Act now. Jayapal's Paycheck Guarantee Act will allow both large and small businesses to continue paying their employees' salaries up to $100,000 and would disincentivize any layoffs and furloughs. The Paycheck Security Act, put forward by Sanders along with Senators by Senator Richard Blumenthal, Doug Jones, and Mark Warner, would cover the wages and benefits of all employees whose companies have been affected by the pandemic. Senator Markey called on Congress to pass a people's bailout, which would provide economic relief directly to people rather than through business loans or unemployment benefits, and would expand the existing Medicare system to cover all Americans. And Ed Markey says another 3.2 million Americans have filed for unemployment. We cannot leave them behind. We urgently need a people's bailout that guarantees Medicare for all, universal sick leave, and recurring monthly payments for all. That sounds like it may be a Senate version, at least something similar to the Jayapal-Tlaib ABC Act. At EPI, Shearholtz wrote, the current unemployment rate, with nearly 1 in 5 workers out of a job, was previously unimaginable and is nearly 5 times the worst 7-week stretch of the Great Recession of 2008 and 2009. The Congressional Budget Office projects that without additional relief, the unemployment rate will average 16% in the third quarter of this year and 10.1% for the entire calendar year of 2021. That is undoubtedly far too optimistic. And as I've said before, well, they must be talking about the calendar year here. But even if we're talking about the calendar year, we're undoubtedly going to be averaging over 20% for the other 3 quarters. So I don't see how we get to an average of 16% in the third quarter. I think that's a sheer underestimate. But CBO tends to do that when it's talking about unemployment rates or things like that. It usually overestimates the amount of the deficit we're going to have, but it underestimates how many people are going to be employed, are not going to be employed. So, direct relief is demanded of all kinds. Now, the Jayapal-Tlaib bill isn't mentioned here directly, but I've left a link to a video that was pointed to me by Dolores Pierce this afternoon, and it was a Facebook video from Now This Politics, and there's a link to it in the description. And if you click on it, you will find a discussion among four people and the host of the broadcast. Let me bring it up just for a minute. But anyway, I highly recommend that you watch this. Let me bring it up for a minute. And let me share that screen so we can see it. Okay, I'm not going to play it. It's too long to play. And it's not mine anyway, so it's probably here. Okay, so the host was Josie Duffy Rice. One of the panelists, okay, was Afton Branch, who's a local person from Detroit, helping people in the economics area. And then there were three other people on the panel. One, okay, was Rowan Gray. And then there was Stephanie Kelton. And last but not least was Congresswoman Jayapal-Tlaib. And they were talking about the ABC Act, okay, and minting the coin, and deficits, and inflation. Well, minting the coin actually refers to the platinum coin, or in this case, the $1 trillion coin, because the Jayapal-Tlaib ABC Act is going to be funded by 2 platinum coins totaling $2.2 trillion. So they talk about the platinum coins, okay, and minting them, okay, a bit, and they talk about inflation issues, and they talk about what people need during this really terrible time. And I recommend it highly to you, and I've left you the link. So let me take it down now. And we'll go to the next piece of business. Guess what? Part of the relief that Nancy Pelosi is trying to provide is Pelosi support for a corporate lobbyist bailout, which was denounced as, quote, dumbest political maneuver you could possibly make right now. This was written by Jake Johnson on May 7th, which is today, of course, Common Dreams. And there's a picture of Nancy, and she's got on a scarf that can double as a face mask to hide her Botox. And the article tells us that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has thrown her support behind a proposal to allow corporate lobbying groups to receive bailout money from a COVID-19 relief program meant for small businesses, which is a move one critic bluntly described as the, quote, dumbest political maneuver you could possibly make right now, unquote. I think it may share that particular title with having a video where you show your extremely expensive and large freezers filled with designer ice cream and chocolates. I'm not sure which is the most ill-advised. During a webinar with small business representatives on Tuesday, Pelosi said the next coronavirus relief package will include a change to the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP for small businesses, that would permit 501c6 organizations to receive forgivable taxpayer loans. quote, many of the largest lobbying forces are organized under the 501c6 section of the tax code as trade groups, unquote. The Intercept's Li Fang reported on Wednesday. He said, quote, lobbyists have stepped up a campaign to make sure professional influence peddlers are eligible for the PPP. The push also includes a demand for an additional $25 billion for canceled events and other lost revenue from the coronavirus pandemic. Okay, and Crystal Ball remarked, on Rising this morning that, well, maybe Nancy Pelosi felt she had to do that because it's not possible anymore for Congress to formulate any legislation without calling on the lobby groups to do it for them. And so maybe we do need to bail them out because otherwise we wouldn't be able to have any legislation. But then she allowed as how, well, maybe that's why our legislation is so terrible. But getting back to the article, quote again, senior Democratic lawmakers, including House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, plan to accommodate the demand and change the eligibility standard so that small business bailout money can flow to business advocacy groups. Maybe we should form a business advocacy group right quick and get some bailout money for ourselves. While Pelosi said the next coronavirus stimulus bill will expand the PPP to include 501c6 organizations. Oh, by the way, 501c4 organizations too, like the super PACs. They'll be able to get bailouts too. But the Speaker did not say whether the legislation will make 501c5 groups that represent labor unions eligible for the loan programs. After all, we can't have labor eligible for the loan program, can we? Li Fang says on Twitter, the Democratic push to expand P3 eligibility means small business rescue funds could go to thousands of lobbyists, from the National Rifle Association to the National Restaurant Association. And Lee says, the National Restaurant Association is, quote, the, unquote, reason there has been no raise in the federal minimum wage, no paid sick leave law. That's why they pay their top lobbyist as much as $3 million a year, working out of a palatial new office building in D.C. That's who Dems want to bail out. Well, sure, why not, folks? After all, the top lobbyists and organizations like that are part of the creative class. They create destruction everywhere they go. Pelosi's support for a lobbyist bailout comes as she's facing pressure from outside progressives, including nurses, to advance a bold COVID-19 stimulus package and stop rubber stamping piecemeal legislation that provides insufficient relief to frontline workers, the unemployed, and states and localities. She's facing pressure. In a blog post on Thursday, Dave Dayen, executive editor of the American Prospect, offered a scathing assessment of both Nancy Pelosi's leadership and the refusal of Congressional Progressive Caucus leaders to raise their voices in dissent. And we'll go into what Dave said in just a minute and skip down a little bit to the article says, the last month the Progressive Caucus unveiled a list of priorities for the next coronavirus stimulus package, including $2,000 monthly direct cash payments to all U.S. households and an expansion of Medicare to cover the unemployed and uninsured. But it is unclear which, if any, of the demands will make it into the final bill, expected to hit the House floor for a vote as early as next week. Well, we're getting into next week, and we should be able to find out what this bill has in it. I hope, if it doesn't have in it all that we've mentioned thus far, and not have a bailout for the lobbyists, and not have, okay, a repeal of any liability for businesses that provide unsafe conditions for their workers when they open up. If any of that, okay, is in the bill, that has to be stopped. And the bill has to be stopped if we don't get what we need. Either everything has to be frozen at that point, and Congress has to be frozen until they deliver what the public needs and wants. During the webinar with small business leaders on Tuesday, Pelosi said Jayapal's paycheck guarantee proposal is very worthy of consideration, but did not commit to including it in the stimulus package. Okay, and Dayan said, as we'll see again in a minute, quote, "That's code for nice work, but it's not getting in the bill," wrote Dayan. Well, we'll see. We'll see. We need to make calls. We need to get it in the bill. Next, we have something from little Chucky Schmucky, to quote Howie Klein, one of my favorite old fogey Democrats. Because even though he now lives in Kentucky, he is New York, but colorful. From New York, I believe from Brooklyn, by way of California, and most recently Kentucky. And this article, written for The Hill by Alexander Bolton, on May 7th, its headline is Schumer Pelosi set to unveil, quote, Rooseveltian, unquote, relief package. Watch out for a little grave turning, folks. Maybe grave turning.
Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer said Thursday that he and Speaker Nancy Pelosi will soon.
Okay, I'm not going to play this. Well, maybe I will. It's only 37 seconds.
Unveil a coronavirus relief package that he described as Rooseveltian in its scope and size. Schumer said on an MSNBC interview with Stephanie Ruhle, quote, "We need big action. We need Franklin Rooseveltian type action, and we hope to take that in the House and Senate in a very big and bold way." Schumer's remarks came in response to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's statement earlier this week that Congress needs to take a, quote, pause before passing any more pandemic relief legislation.
That's it. So, don't think I'll get burned for such a short clip. That's what Schumer said, though. Adding that he and Pelosi are working very closely together on putting together a very strong plan. You will hear shortly. Congress has passed, of course, nearly $3 trillion in aid over the past 2 months. None of it has been very Rooseveltian, from my point of view. Not very Rooseveltian, okay, at all. Well, maybe mildly Rooseveltian was the expansion of unemployment insurance. It would have been more if people could have gotten through the unemployment system to take advantage of it. And the $1,200 fiscal stimulus check would have been more Rooseveltian if it had been able to get out of the Treasury Department a little faster. By the way, we finally did get our stimulus yesterday. Schumer on Thursday said the fiscally cautious approach now being taken by Republicans like Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy reminded him of former President Herbert Hoover's response to the 1929 stock market crash and the onset of the Great Depression. Yeah, it kind of reminded me of that too, but we have to note that the only reason why it was possible is because Schumer and Pelosi let the earlier CARES Act bill with its $4.6 trillion slush fund for big business get through Congress. The bailout for big business got through Congress then. That's what the Republicans really needed to get. And the leverage which the Democrats had was to say no to that until all the rest was done, or simply say no to it altogether. But certainly to tell the Republicans none of this gets passed until our stuff gets passed, and here's our stuff. They should have been held up for that. And if they needed to make any compromise, it should have been piece by piece, like, we'll give you $50 billion if you give us this. We'll give you another $50 billion if you give us this. Okay, remember, each billion is leveraged 10 times by sending the money to the Federal Reserve and having it basically back a loan program. So giving them $50 billion is like giving them $500 billion, essentially. So that's the way it should have been done. That's the way it would have been done by any good negotiator. Nancy Pelosi, of course, as we saw yesterday, is terrible. She is a total failure, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Hoover famously and wrongly predicted a rapid economic recovery in 1930. Instead, the Great Depression lasted until 1939. Does it sound familiar, folks? A Republican predicting a rapid recovery? Schumer said the better course of action is to follow in the footsteps of former President Franklin Roosevelt, who oversaw the largest expansion of the federal government and is credited by many historians with helping to end the Great Depression. I think he's credited by most historians with helping to end the Great Depression. Schumer noted that Congress has appropriated nearly $500 billion to set up a Treasury Department Federal Reserve credit lending facility with more than $4 trillion in firepower, or $4.6 trillion in firepower, so that financial markets would not crash. We've got to have the same focus, even a stronger focus on the people, the working people, the average people who are suffering as well. Why didn't you have it before you passed that slush fund bill? We need the same kind of big, bold, tough action, he said. We need action here to help average folks. We've done some in the House and Senate. We need to do a lot more. Brave words for someone who gave up his leverage and would not filibuster that earlier frickin' bill. The $2.2 trillion CARES Act, signed into law March 27th, substantially beefed up unemployment benefits by adding a $600 a week federal bonus to workers, state unemployment benefits in some states boosting jobless benefits above the average hourly wage. Anyway, you get this picture. You've been hearing about it from me for days now. The jobless figures continue to increase. The Dow Jones average continues to increase. The misery continues to increase, and Congress does nothing due to lack of leverage. So, Here we go. What's rapidly becoming a daily dose of Dave Dayen, May 7th, 2020 column, unsanitized. Pelosi dials up a K Street bailout. A K Street bailout. And there she is with her pink face mask doubling as a fashionable scarf and her pink suit. Dave says, I read this interview to Ezra Klein and Congressional Progressive Caucus co-chair Pramila Jayapal, and I have to say I'm tiring of what amounts to a bunch of excuses of how progressives have been functionally locked out of policymaking during this crisis. Jayapal sniffs that, quote, it's, unquote, it's a lot easier to be on the outside and to be pure and never having to make compromises, unquote. Excuse me a second. And said that there aren't enough of the progressives willing to use their power to stop the legislation outright. She essentially says that as long as there's a bone in there, somewhere in the legislation, that members can be easily picked off. But Dave says then, but the problem isn't about compromise, it's about invisibility. Nancy Pelosi has run the House of Representatives by fiat for close to 2 months without any representatives there in Washington. And there hasn't been a single word of protest as she locks every other member of the Democratic caucus out of policymaking and hands them take it or leave it legislation to rubber stamp. If Jayapal has ever objected to that, you sure wouldn't know. You sure wouldn't know. And I do not know why she hasn't developed a unified front of the CPC and gotten the consent of all the members of the CPC on pain of expulsion from the CPC to go to Nancy Pelosi and to say, if you don't bring Congress back into session, either remotely or some other way, we are definitely voting against you for the speakership when if you're lucky enough to return in 2021. We are not letting you run this place again this way. You need to stop this right now and get remote voting in place. As Ezra Klein points out, instead of organizing around one thing, what the progressives have done is supply 100-item wish lists that everyone knows won't be fulfilled. This has 2 consequences. The wish lists show progressives are not completely serious about governing, and leadership can always pick like 2 to 100 out of the list and give members something to justify voting for a bad bill. So Pelosi knows what kind of game the progressives are playing, because they won't organize, they won't come together, they won't get behind the Jayapal-Tlaib bill, the Jayapal Paycheck Guarantee Act, and the Medicare for All bill. They won't get behind like those 3 things and say, hey, Nancy, this is your litmus test right now. Get these in, get them voted on. Let's see whether Mitch McConnell has the guts to turn them down. Meanwhile, Pelosi has been talking about what she'll add to the next bill, and it's relatively unconstrained by wish lists. One of the elements is changing the eligibility standards for, well, we covered this before, 501c4 and C6 nonprofit organizations. You might know it by another name, lobbyists. Unbelievably, K Street has asked for a bailout and is on the road to getting it. I mean, lobbyists are good at lobbying, I guess, right? Says Dave. And he goes on, as far as I can tell, they've not stopped lobbying amid the crisis. Only Congress has stopped in the midst of the Congress. Only the House has stopped. The Senate seems to keep going on. And there's been a frenzy of lobbying around Mitch McConnell's desire for a corporate liability shield for coronavirus-related lawsuits, for example. Why do high-powered lobby shops need a free $10 million per firm exactly? Also, PPP will be out of money by the time any bill passes. Does tweaking eligibility signal more to this program, in part to just shovel money at lobbying firms? Meanwhile, Jayapal's bill to guarantee payroll support from the government for the duration of the crisis was, quote, very worthy of consideration. That's code for, quote again, nice work, but it's not getting in the bill. The House Democratic slogan is for the people, and that's selectively true. Pelosi listens to some people, powerful people, and she pays lip service to others. She does this because she knows she can get away with it. Shahid Buttar, where are you? You need to make her worry that she can't get away with it right now. There's been essentially no dissent from those on the losing end of that equation, says Dave. The House still doesn't even have remote voting in place, and caucuses are doing Zoom calls rather than official hearings. Hundreds of members of Congress representing hundreds of millions of people have been disenfranchised. If there's state and local government aid in a future bill, if it ever happens, then progressives are going to shrug and support something with a lobbyist bailout in it. You can see it now. If you funnel all lawmaking through one person, you're going to get things laundered through a certain perspective that has a likelihood of occasionally being myopic. Not myopic, stupid. The K Street bailout is the dumbest political maneuver you could possibly make right now, says Dave. That was a quote from Dave Dayen. Businesses already have access to insanely generous support at the federal level. The Federal Reserve have propped up their equity and credit markets. Who do you think pays the lobbyists? The PPP is an underweighted program that isn't going to save most small businesses. It's not even designed to do that. All you're doing by adding lobbyists to it is stoking public anger. And the anger is well placed. Yes, it's like what happened in 2008 when Rick Santelli got on the floor of the stock exchange and single-handedly lit the match that resulted in the Tea Party movement. Why? Because the Democrats would not pass a bill, did not pass a bailout bill preventing the financial companies from giving bonuses to the executives that got us into the crash. And the executives were getting those bonuses, and Santelli was going crazy on the floor of the stock market, condemning the whole thing. And Obama was then satisfyingly saying to the financial people, I'm the only one protecting you from the pitchforks. That's what he said at the time, which, by the way, was another hugely stupid political move. Just saying that. Hugely stupid. But Dave says, all you're doing by adding lobbyists to it is stoking the public anger. Will this be another Tea Party movement? Let's hope it's a Tea Party movement on the left. What is a Tea Party movement on the left? Well, maybe a beer party movement. Huh? It's not what you think, says Bonnie.
What you get it drinking.
Oh, it's not what I'm drinking. Oh, I think Bonnie has probably given me some port.
Yes.
That was unexpected. Okay. All you're doing by adding lobbyists to it is stoking public anger, and the anger is well placed. Lobbyists don't deserve free money right now. They never deserve any free money. What do you mean, right now? But when there's no pressure whatsoever on the one-woman Congress, you stumble into mistakes like this. Surely progressive lawmakers don't like being alienated from their professional duties in this fashion. Maybe they should say something. Then there's further stuff here about the mismanagement of things by Jared Kushner, who evidently is deep into managing much of what's going on in huge sections of the federal government right now. A quote here, but the description of Kushner's operation to secure medical equipment reflects the farce that our policymaking apparatus has been turned into. A combination of kleptocracy and total ignorance that is hard to even really analyze outside of saying, quote, this is bad, unquote. Anyway, this next part of the column is a catalog of the corruption involved in Kushner's management of getting the protective equipment for people, such things as the N95 masks and the other protective equipment, okay, that people need. There's a supply company set up by Republican operatives even that's now under criminal investigation. And there are more allegations that the administration prioritized friends of Kushner for contracts. Of course that happened. The signature move of the Trump administration, the thing that really characterizes it more than anything else, is crony capitalism. Crony capitalism. So the next Postmaster General of the Post Office, who is elected by the Board of Governors with no congressional input at all necessary, the Board of Governors announced that Louis DeJoy, currently the lead fundraiser for the Republican National Convention, would become the next Postmaster General. Amazing. Just amazing. The position requires no Senate confirmation. The Board of Governors simply elects its own leader. And Dave says, I would say DeJoy fits with that picture of partisan interference from the White House, undoubtedly. His wife is Trump's nominee for U.S. ambassador to Canada. So this is someone directly tied to Trump, taking over the lead policy-making position at the Postal Service. What has Trump been trying to do? He's been trying to destroy the post office. Incidentally, while DeJoy was CEO of XPO Logistics, which had contracts with the Postal Service, several women workers had miscarriages on the job after being ignored in their requests to lighten their duties, which included lifting heavy boxes. In one notorious case, after DeJoy stepped down but was still on the XPO board, a woman died on the warehouse floor, and workers were instructed to work around her for the rest of the shift. Dave says, pray for the Postal Service. Dave, I surely will. I surely will. Postal Service really needs our help. So, one more article on common dreams, a little different from the major theme of tonight, which I'm sure you got extremely well. This is from Common Dreams of Today, and it's a column written by Norman Solomon, who was one of the surrogates for Bernie in his campaign. And Norman says, if the presumptive nominee seems to be in trouble. Reuters just released a national poll showing Joe Biden's advantage over President Trump in popular support has eroded in recent weeks. And the contest is essentially a toss-up. In a half-dozen key swing states, Biden is only up by an average of 4%. Even among the Democratic faithful, enthusiasm for Biden is low. Okay, among the young, it's been close to non-existent. The myth that Trump will defeat himself expired the night before Hillary Clinton gave her concession speech. Yet it persists as Democratic Party power brokers and many pundits go easy on Biden and humor his repeated boast that, quote, I'll beat him like a drum, unquote. I don't think Biden knows how to beat a drum, do you? Biden remains firmly stuck in a mindset that makes it highly unlikely he can incentivize the big turnout of voters from the progressive side that's needed against Trump. That mentality goes unchallenged in standard corporate media framing, which evades basic political realities of economic inequality. Using a common bromide for mainline journalists, the Washington Post reported on Tuesday that, quote, Democrats have been split since 2016 over whether energizing black voters or winning over some white working class voters in the industrial Midwest is the best shot for the party in November, unquote. That kind of either-or framing was rejected and somewhat transcended by the Bernie 2020 campaign for good reason, as pollster Stanley Greenberg has emphasized. The Democratic Party doesn't have a, quote, white working class problem, unquote. It has a working class problem. No quotes, just a working class problem. Norman goes on to say, the perception that the party is in the pocket of the rich has damaged support and undermined voter turnout from working class people of all races. As a thoroughly corporate politician, Biden is ill-positioned to change that perception. But if a 2020 Democratic National Convention, likely virtual rather than in person, can move the party in progressive directions, the chances of effectively deflating Trump's phony pseudo-populism would improve. That's where Bernie delegates come in. Of course, the Biden team would like the National Convention to be a smoothly corporate affair without appreciable leverage by firm progressive forces in terms of deciding on party rules and the platform. Whether Biden can stifle those forces may depend on whether the Sanders campaign can win enough delegates in upcoming primaries to reach the 25% threshold that's required for bringing proposals to the entire convention. Right now, with 20 primaries still to come, surpassing the 25% mark is certainly within reach. While the official Sanders campaign has nearly disbanded, some grassroots Bernie supporters are continuing or restarting their work. In many states, the Our Revolution organization is assisting local activists to get out the Bernie vote. The potentially historic significance of such efforts got a boost this week when a federal judge reinstated New York's Democratic presidential primary set for June 23rd. The court reversed a state board of elections decision to cancel that primary. Oh, that was a decision widely understood to be at the behest of the state's establishment-oriented Democratic governor, Andrew Cuomo. The court ruling, U.S. News and World Report noted, quote, allows Bernie Sanders to secure more delegates and more influence ahead of the Democratic National Convention. Meanwhile, three groups, People for Bernie Sanders, RootsAction.org, where I'm the national director, says Norman Solomon, and Progressive Democrats of America have just launched a new campaign called Once Again. The goal is to help activists to mobilize in upcoming primary states and win a new wave of Sanders delegates. Bernie's campaign has suspended, but the movement to fight for the Bernie platform must go on, said Claire Sandberg, who was National Organizing Director for the Bernie 2020 campaign. And she went on, quote, people who recognize the urgency of issues like ending the wars, canceling student debt, and enacting Medicare for all and a Green New Deal must work together to ensure progressive voters make their voices heard in the remaining primaries. It's also vital that Bernie supporters rally behind down-ballot progressive candidates whose fortunes may be determined by small margins. For those reasons, I support this effort to mobilize Bernie supporters to cast their ballots through the end of the primary. Unquote. Well, I certainly would like down-ballot progressive candidates to have a better chance of winning. And that includes the down-ballot progressive candidates who are Green Party candidates or Progressive Party candidates. Because in many, many places, the down-ballot candidates who claim to be progressive are really centrist or rightist types of Democrats. Anyway, Norman says, for those reasons, I support the effort to mobilize Bernie supporters to cast their ballots through the end of the primary. Oh, Sandberg said that. Sorry, not Norman. Former 2020 National Co-Chair Nina Turner, who also spoke on a Once Again kickoff live stream on May 5th, so Nina is evidently behind this, summed up, quote, we have had enough of the status quo policies that do not change the material conditions for the poor, working poor, and middle class in this country. We intend to keep pushing for a government that works for everyone. Corporate media and powerful Democrats are eager to portray the 2020 Democratic presidential race as a thing of the past. However, progressive activists might have some very different ideas. One thing I thought that was interesting here is the groups who are uniting to carry out the Once Again campaign. And there are a lot of people who have who have left the Bernie campaign now to take other jobs. Fayez Shakir and Jeff Weaver, okay, of course. And in the lines at the beginning of this article, while the official Sanders campaign has nearly disbanded, that's good, because that means most of the people who sabotaged the campaign in its final stages have gone and taken on other jobs. So the restarted campaign hopefully will not have them in it, but will only have people like Norman Solomon, okay, and also Nina Turner in it. And I don't know about Claire Sandberg. I'm not sure where she stands. But if Norman Solomon, okay, and also Nina Turner, okay, are involved, and some of the Our Revolution people like Larry Cohn, okay, are also involved, then they will be people who will not only fight for Bernie delegates, but if the situation changes, as it apparently is, with respect to the viability of Joe Biden as a candidate, will also fight for the resurrection of Bernie himself as a candidate. And that, of course, would be a very good thing, I think. And of course, it goes along with our efforts to damage the poll position of Joe Biden in the group that we have to make Joe Biden's record completely explicit to the public. And it also fits into our possible plans. I wouldn't call them plans, but a possible effort to do a National Bernie Day if Bernie is not nominated at the convention. So there we are. That's what I wanted to say tonight. But, okay, I'm going to emphasize here that the fact that Congress is even considering liability for corporations that order their workers back to work, having that liability canceled by legislation, the fact that this Congress is even considering that is a measure of the corruption and lack of concern for people and the presence of a death cult in this particular Congress, the Trump death cult. If that happens, people have to go out immediately on strike. There has to be a general strike if that passes. And people all over the country should not return to work until that legislation is absolutely repealed. There can be no incentive for businesses to kill workers on the job. We can't allow that to happen. We can't allow that to happen, folks. That's got to be the line that says, thus far and no further. That has to be a red line. And the other red line has to be bailing out the freaking corporate lobbyists who've been preventing us from getting Medicare for all and from getting a living wage and from getting nice things. Those have got to be two red lines. Nancy Pelosi's got to be warned. These are lines she cannot step over. I don't care what else is in those bills. They shall not pass. They shall not pass. So here we go. I'm going to consider your comments now. And once we get by all the greetings, Stephanie says, Facebook is still getting me. I got groups I admin, but that's it. I wonder how long TGIS is going to happen. So Stephanie is suffering under Facebook bans. Dale says, that's a staggering figure. You mean the unemployment figure? It's staggering. Hi, Deborah Wilson. How are you? And Matt said, what are some theories, okay, of revolution? How bad would it have to get for people to think of actually revolting? So many people are now suffering, it makes me wonder. It makes me wonder, too, I would have said that long since there would have been a revolution against this neoliberal regime. I don't understand why people just continue to take it. Continue to take it. I don't know where the breaking point is going to be. But I know that when it's reached, the military will not help them. I think enough of the military will line up with us in these times, of misery. And they will not defend the neolibs. Stephanie says, in Bangladesh, they're not just giving them money, but going around and giving them food. One of the poorest places in the world. What are we doing? Basically, fend for yourself. It's shameful. And Rick Maynard says, crystal ball. Young voters to Democratic Party. Screw you. Yep. Crystal ball did say that. I saw that today. Stephanie said, if you enjoy Dr. Joe's show, please share it to your friends and groups. Thank you, Stephanie. And Daniel Goheen says, hashtag no mandatory vaccines. You are a small business owner. Now is the time. Open. Don't wait for the government to tell you when. No, don't wait for the government to tell you when. Stay home and save your life. Stay home and save your life. Stephanie says, hey, Deborah, I've missed you. Lana Dell says, some people don't file for unemployment. They either don't need the dollars, are too proud, or their employer puts up the blocks. And Lana says, I've had that last experience myself. Yes, I know. There are very many of us who have. I haven't had that last experience. Fortunately, my employers never tried to block any unemployment claims after they laid me off. Stephanie says, Lana Dell, or they're too ashamed, which they shouldn't be. Sandy Degg says, hello. And Matt says, you have all these people counting and reporting all these details for the unemployed, but we're not using the immense wealth we have in this country to actually help these people as we should. No, we're not using the immense wealth we have in this country, but even worse, we are not using our currency creation power to actually help these people. The Jayapal-Tlaib bill would give a basic income of $2,000 a month to every American for as long as the coronavirus crisis actually lasts. And then $1,000 a month per child as well during the crisis. And then after the crisis is over, $1,000 a month to every person for a year thereafter, because it's assumed the economy would not be immediately recovering from a long crisis period, which is what we're looking at now. Okay, Deborah says, Stephanie, you too. Stephanie says, hello, Sandy. Sandy says, hi, Stephanie. Deborah says, trying to get through a rough day, laugh out loud. The usual laugh out loud. And you? Matt said, why did the progressives in Congress not make a federal case for the CARES Act? Why did they give in so easily to that a very massive giveaway to big corps? What was done in that CARES Act was to present them with a bill that they could vote basically up or down on. And the bill had the $1,200 a month stimulus payments and also the extension of the expansion of unemployment benefits by $600 a week for 4 months. And I think at the time the progressives had no conception that it was going to take so long for people to get on unemployment, that there were so many people who were going to be unemployed wanting to take advantage of the bill, that it was going to overload the state unemployment systems. In other words, nobody recognized that things were in such a bad state of disrepair in those systems that it wouldn't be possible to sign up the people. So basically, they were looking at an extra $2,400 a month for the unemployed going on for 4 months. And so, with people suffering, okay, and immediately suffering, they didn't have the guts to say no to the 500 billion that was going to large corporations. And I believe also that the progressives did not understand the scheme which the Republicans were creating, whereby the 454 billion that was coming out of that 500 billion was going to go to the Federal Reserve in order to back a $4.6 trillion slush fund. I don't think the progressives understood that. Why didn't they understand it? They didn't understand it because the Sanders campaign was basically breaking up, and their attention was divided between the last stages of the campaign and the COVID virus and what was going on in Congress. And I don't think that the major legislative brains on the progressive side, I don't think they understood that slush fund was going to come into existence as a result of the CARES Act. They thought it was just a $454 billion bailout for big business. They didn't understand it was a $4.6 trillion bailout. Had they understood that, they might well have understood that that was all the big businesses were going to need, and they might then have understood that they were giving away their leverage by passing that bill. I think they believed that since big business was going to need more and small business was going to need a lot more, that they'd still have plenty of leverage to get more for their people. But that slush fund was a curveball that they didn't see coming. I'm not trying to excuse them. It was their business to see it coming. They should have seen it coming. It's true the progressives are nowhere near as competent at the ins and outs of legislative infighting in the Congress as Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi are. They are much more crafty and much more aware, okay, of what is going on. And also McConnell was in touch with the Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, who knew exactly what was going on. He was the one who undoubtedly conceptualized this deal and understood there would be a $4.6 trillion slush fund. And he probably made McConnell very much aware of that. But it was never made plain to the Democrats. They went forward in ignorance and didn't realize that meant that most of their leverage was going to be gone. And I think the Democrats since then have gotten more leverage, not because of anything they did, because so many people have become unemployed. I don't think even the Republicans expected this. They didn't expect we were going to have so many millions of people, 7 weeks, 33.5 million new unemployed people. And Deborah said, in Mexico, they have become really draconian in my state. In MX, in New Mexico, oh, so Deborah, do you live in Mexico? Or maybe I'm misinterpreting the MX. Anyway, Mark says, am I being too cynical when I think there is an agenda that seeks to force wages and living standards here down to match those in third world levels so they can bring their production home under their terms? I don't think that's too cynical, but I think They've always had an agenda to force wages and living standards here down, not so they necessarily can bring their production home, just because that's what they do. I mean, that's what they do. They've always wanted to shrink the compensation they have to pay as much as possible, to break the unions, to break the power of the working class, to see that it gets no more power, to turn the middle class into a working class. I mean, they're for aristocracy and plutocracy. That's the lesson we have to learn. They're always for that. The people who control the donors, the people who control the lobbyists, they're always for that. Kay says, Mark, they won't bring jobs back anyway. They just want our third world conditions to last longer. Sandy says, hi, Kay. Kay says, hi, Sandy. And Kay says, I saw that live stream today too, Joe. Yeah. And Kay says, Pelosi needs to go now. And Rick said, I was in a local COVID activist meeting in regards to citizen bailout here in New Hampshire. Oh, you got the meeting on YouTube. Great, Rick. Great. Sandy says, that's a bunch of happy horse. Sorry, what's a bunch of happy horse, Sandy? Kay says, did anyone else see the post from National Nurses Union of their protest at the White House today? Very moving. Proud of them for speaking out. They always speak out. And I'm always proud of them, too. And Matt says, does anyone know the financial details of the bailout money to big corps for AG? What does Boeing get for an interest rate on their bailout loan? And how does that differ from a load that they could get from a bank? Well, I think the interest rates are far less. I mean, I won't say for sure, but I think we're looking at under 1% for those interest rates. We may be looking at the kinds of interest rates the banks get. Mark says, I mean, I guessed that. I don't see why the Fed, which is looking to bail them out anyway, and which does not need the interest, since their losses are already covered by the $454 billion from Treasury. I don't see why Treasury would not make things as easy for them as possible. I think if we knew the interest rate, though, they probably hid that. If it were public, it might not be as low as we're going to find out it has been. One day we will find out. Mark says, this accents the power of the National Chamber of Commerce and for those who manage its agenda. Income streams to the wealthy investors are flowing good through the banks. Now they're opening the gates through manufacturing, and the retail, if they can get people in to do retail. And Sandy says, I bet it's far from anything that Roosevelt would have approved of. I'm pretty sure. And Kay says, they wouldn't know FDR if he bit them. SMH. And Matt said, would FDR be proud of a one-time means-tested $1,200? No. He would not. And Matt said, exactly. There's no negotiation, no leverage. The left just caved in and then postured with feel-good speeches after the fact. What an embarrassment. Well, to be fair, there are only a few of them who made the feel-good speeches after the fact, and those few were too few to have done anything about it anyway. And one or two of them did vote against these bills, knowing that their negative vote did absolutely no good. So, being fair, the squad could not have stopped these bills. It needed the whole CPC to stand as one against these bills, then that would have given Pelosi some problems. It would have given her some problems also, because that would have meant an increasing likelihood that the left would unify and would stand against her for the speakership if and when she came back to Congress. And that might have given her some pause. But right now, she thinks the left is not going to oppose her in 2021. Sandy said he's spinning in his grave like a top. Matt says all the money went to propping up Wall Street and the stock market, 80% of which is owned by the top 10% of households. And what's the percent that's owned by the top 1% of households, Matt? That's the relevant figure, because 9% of the top 10% don't get too much. Don't have too much. Not compared to the other 1%. Kay says K Street is the bank street in D.C. No, it's not the bank street in D.C. It's the lobbyist street in D.C. It's the street for the lobbyists and the nonprofits. It's where they all hang out. It's in the area where all the fancy lunch places are, except the fancy lunch places right around the Congress as well. There are some right around the Congress, but there are many more on K Street. When I had a very small nonprofit with a partner in the late 1970s, we had an office, on I Street, which is just a street over from K. It was on Farragut Square in an old building which since has been torn down. But yeah, we were familiar with all the nice luncheon places, that were around there. Not that we got to go to too many of them, of course, because we were a very poor nonprofit. But that was like the center of town for those who were living off the government and doing well in D.C. Sandy said, I want to kick her with my pink shoes in her pink pants. And Rick says, hell, they put it in their own pockets. Aren't paying people, they're laying them off. It's all just smoke and mirrors all the way to the bank. Yeah, they are laying them off. Matt says, Joe, I love your fighting spirit. This is exactly what is needed. From Sanders on down, they're all rolling over to Pelosi and her corporate donors. They are. In case says Sanders is in the Senate. Yeah, Matt knows that very well, but Sanders is giving in to them too. And by the way, Sanders is still a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He's the only member of the CPC from the Senate. You see, Bernie was one of the founders of the CPC. And he's remained in it from his House days. And Matt said, yes, I should have put Schumer Pelosi. Yeah, little Chucky Schmucky and Pelosi. And Kay says, Sanders is still trying for it all in the Senate. And Lana says, oh, a lobbyist bailout, is that an oxymoron? Not really. It's a meta. It's a meta. There are bailouts that are implemented by the lobbyists, and then there are bailouts of the lobbyists by other lobbyists. It's a meta lobbyist bailout. Steve says, just saw a post that thousands of Catholic churches got PPP money. Yeah, the parishes are little small businesses. They're little subsidiaries Kay says, I saw that too, Steve. Yeah, the Catholic Church is always there with their handout. And Matt says, does Shahid have any chance? Does anyone know how he's polling? I don't know how he's polling. He did well in the primary, considering that he was going up against her. He came in second, but of course he was nowhere near the 50% mark. I think he was around 18 or 19 or 20% or something like that. Can he get near the 50% mark? I don't know. He's trying hard. Of course, he cannot canvass now. And the big weapon of insurgents in congressional districts is canvassing. And it doesn't matter how many volunteers he has, they cannot canvass. But they can use the phones. And they can use social media. And I think he does have a lot of volunteers. And I think he's raised a lot of money, not compared to Pelosi, but compared to most insurgent campaigns. And Shahid is pretty brilliant. He is. And he's pretty tough. And he's going to do better than anybody thinks. Whether he can beat her, I don't know. But he might be able to give her a run for her money, especially if she keeps on screwing up in this bailout. If people perceive that they did not get a bailout because of Nancy Pelosi, because she botched up the negotiations, as rich as her district is, there will be hundreds of thousands of people in that district that will have been hurt by the fact that the Paycheck Guarantee Bill was not passed and that a Medicare for All bill was not passed and that the Jayapal-Tlaib bill was not passed. There will be many thousands of people in her district that will want to punish her for her failures to pass these very good bills. And he, Shahid, will make them aware of her failures. Russ says, I need to turn in another heavy day tomorrow. Thank you for coming, Russ. As always, it's great to see you. Steve says good night. Dolores says good night. Sandy says good night. Sandy says coffee pot movement. No, there's already a coffee movement, isn't there? A coffee party movement. There's a coffee party movement. And the coffee party movement is very centrist, highly underwhelming, and not much of a movement. And William Burrell says we're being sold down the river. Sooner or later, somewhere, a number of someone's going to bound to wake up and notice establishment Democrats aren't helping the American people. Wake up, the progressives. There are feet to hold to the fire. Either make your stand or stop with all the hollering about we're here to help the American people. Kay says, I support a beer party movement. Laugh out loud. As long as it's an angry beer party movement. Sandy says, kick in the pants movement. I second that motion. Sandy says, Trump's. Lana says, oh my God. OMG. Kay says, Trump wants to close down the USPS so he can't vote in this election, among other reasons. Well, we'll probably be able to vote. We'll just have to pay FedEx for the privilege. But maybe FedEx will be celebrating to such a degree if the post office go out of business that it will generously make the offer to transmit our mail-in ballots for free. Okay, but of course, they will have no liability if they lose the mail, right? Sandy says, I almost lost my son working at the post office. Too hot driving in my mail Jeep in the summer. God. Amazing. Matt says, do you think they need it after all the sexual abuse court cases they have lost? Jesus. You're droll, Matt. You're droll. Stephanie says, sorry, long annoying phone call. Stephanie says, Dr. Joe is the man. Thank you, Stephanie. I'm certainly one man. Stephanie says, I still want Bernie. Just listening to him speaking a bit ago had me crying because I miss it and him. I do too. And listen, he'd be a much better president than he would be a campaigner. Much better. I think he'd be fighting tooth and nail then every step of the way. And Kay says, me too, Stephanie. Was a great town hall on COVID incarceration. I watched it too. Kay says, Bernie is still trying to work for we the people, all of us. He is, but he made a big mistake suspending his campaign. He really wasn't tough enough. He should have told the DNC to go screw themselves. He should have told them continuously, look, you're better off having me in the party. If you throw me out of the primary, I'm going to run third party and beat your asses the third party. So just give me an excuse. Just give me an excuse. That's what he should have told them. And Stephanie says, lots of love, folks. And Kay says, back at you, Stephanie. And Stephanie says, Jeff Weaver is the snake, only one of the snakes. He had quite a few snakes. Just listen to Fiorella Isabel talk about all the snakes in California coming out of the Bernie machine. The kind of people who used to work for the Center for American Progress and who were brought over by FIS. Stephanie says, Bernie does deserve his own day. He certainly does. And Stephanie says, good night, love. Steve says, good night. Kay says, night, honey. Sandy says, have a good night, Stephanie. Stephanie says, it's been a rough day. Stephanie says, you tell him, Joe. Kay says, you too, Richard. Okay, Dolores says, good night, Mark. Sandy says, night, Mark. And I forgot to remind you about my Patreon account, which is patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your sharing. And just thank you. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the live stream. I'll see you on Saturday. Tomorrow I take off to take care of some necessary household business. Catch up on various things. So good night. Have a wonderful day tomorrow. Have a wonderful day Saturday. And I will see you on Saturday night.